Hello and welcome to the Ryerson University Ted Rogers School of Management Sports Business Spotlight. We're going to continue our series with top leaders in the sports industry. We're going to talk about industry trends. We're going to talk about leadership and hear some great stories along the way. My name is Chris Schufelt, Vice President of Business Operations at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and I'm going to act as the moderator and host for this 10-part series. We continue our spotlight today with someone that I've known for a long period of time. We haven't worked together in a while. But Russell Sargeant, he's the current Vice President of NBC Sports Strategy and Sponsorship at NBC Universal Media. Welcome today, Russell.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Russell and I, we first got to know each other back in 2006. And I was working still at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment at the time, but we were just getting into our soccer franchise. And we had just purchased the rights. We were going to enter the league in 2007, and I was helping lead the sponsorship program. Russell was at Major League Soccer and their business arm, Soccer United Marketing, and he was the partnership marketing guy that taught me about soccer, helped me out along the way, and ultimately got us towards launching our franchise from a business standpoint. So those were some fun times as the league was going, eh, Russ?
They were heady times and fun times, and we were making some of it up as we went along, but I look back on that era of my career with a lot of fondness.
It was a lot of fun, and we'll get into your bio here in a second, but you had, before you were at the league, you had some time on the team side as well. So lots of experience you were able to share with someone like me who was selling soccer for the very, very first time. I'd sold basketball. We had sold hockey for long periods of time. Soccer was new. So I want to set the table with your bio first and make sure people understand some of your background and varied experiences in sports before we get into our discussion. So I'm going to read the bio that you've provided here. So Russell has dedicated his 25-year career to development and execution of best-in-class sports business partnerships, both in the United States and Australia. Through leadership roles with Adidas America, Major League Soccer, and now NBC Sports, Russell has a diverse and extensive experience with the business of sport from brand, property, and media perspectives. For the past 7 years, Russell has served in a sales leadership role with NBC Sports in their New York office. Working with the sales team, Russell is responsible for setting and implementing the national sales strategy for key NBC Sports properties, including the English Premier League, NASCAR, IndyCar, Notre Dame football, and the Tour de France. In his current role, Russell works across internal NBC Sports business functions and with external partners to develop and implement unique and creative sponsorship interactions across the core partner properties. So Russell, official welcome, and we're going to get right into the discussion because before we got into the recording here, we were talking about how we're both working from home. Our kids are upstairs, they're doing homeschooling. It's been an interesting 11 months, I guess it is now, to say the least. And I've started this question with the previous guests as well. Now, I'd love to hear about that moment for you. And for us, it was, March 11th and then into March 12th when the sports world stopped and started to figure out what COVID was all about. I remember it vividly. What was happening at NBC Sports at that time, and how did you guys deal with that?
Well, first, I had a personal journey to make. On March 11th, I was in Anfield, which is Liverpool Football Club's home stadium, watching Anfield play Atletico Madrid in a Champions League second leg quarterfinal, and actually second legs of the second round, excuse me, and I think it was probably one of the last, if not the last, sporting event around the world that was in front of a fully packed stadium. So that was on March 11th. That was the day that, the NBA made their announcement, and essentially all the dominoes started to fall. At the same time, President Trump at the time announced a border closing that was happening as of Friday midnight at that time. And so I'm getting frantic calls from my wife and from family around the world saying, are you going to be able to get home? So I was. March 12th involved a train from Liverpool down to London and a flight from London back to New York. and what was a very interesting experience going through customs and immigration at JFK for the first time since sort of this pandemic became real. So I had to make that personal journey, which will always be a vivid memory for me. But at the same time, yeah, I was, staying in touch with our management team that I'm a part of here, across our sales team across the country. And so from a business perspective, we sell sports, right? And all of a sudden we had no live sports. We went from this, very robust programming grid of live sports, whether it was the Premier League, whether it was NHL hockey, whether it was live golf, all of these different things that are filling our airways are gone. And we don't know for how long they will be gone for. We don't know if this is going to be a couple of weeks of interruption or a much longer term interruption, which it ended up being. So, how do we work through that? And ultimately, the first thing that, the management team talking together came to was, guys, we've just got to be over communicative, right? We have to internally make sure all of our people know what's going on, make sure they all know what our external messaging should be so that we can be consistent in the marketplace. Because what we don't want is, different partners hearing different things from us. So the first key thing that we sort of agreed upon was let's talk every single day, and not just individually. Let's get our entire sales team, and our entire sales team across the country is, a couple of hundred people. And so we decided, for the short term, we're going to get them together every single day, just to talk through what's happening and to talk through what our messaging is. And then at the same time, we want to make sure that we over communicate with our partners. And whether that is, I don't know, that's okay. Some of the questions that they had, we didn't have answers for, but we just needed to make sure that we could be a resource for them because they were looking for answers. Our agency partners were looking for answers that they could give to our shared clients. Our clients were calling us. We just needed to be the best resource we could possibly be for our external partners as well. So it was a bit of a scramble, but that was sort of the main message of those very early days, which was, let's just make sure that we communicate excessively to make sure that we're all connected.
You mentioned, hundreds of people on your sales teams. And that's a lot of people that are relying on this industry, and just that's a one major network. The communication piece and the daily, here's what's going on, here's what we know. It just sounds, it's okay to not have all the answers as a leader, right? And so many people have said that we've talked to along the way over this last year. There's no playbook for this. We don't have all the answers. We're in this together. So that human connection piece is really important. And it sounds like that's exactly where you guys were.
Absolutely. And honesty is key in this. And, if ever there was an opportunity or a situation that allowed for the answer to be, I don't know, that was it. Everybody understood that this was evolving every single minute, and it was an experience and a situation that none of us had ever been in. So that honesty and that ability to just really just get out in front of people and say, let me work on that. Let me see what I can find out. But right now, I don't know. That was okay. And I think in general, that's okay. It in my experience is a heck of a lot better than trying to make something up just to appear to have all the answers.
Right. So your business is holding rights for many different properties and selling sponsorship advertising together with that. The negotiations that you would have had to have with your partners along the way and that relationship, that's where we've been and our leagues have been as well, whether it's Major League Soccer, NHL, NBA. We've seen different technology, innovation, digital, things that haven't happened before. I'd love to get some insight from you as to, maybe how you approach those negotiations and recognize that it's a different world we're living in right now. And how are we going to accomplish this together and make sure we can all drive revenue and keep everything moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were, Chris, there are multiple stages to that. I think in the very early days, it was what we would refer to as triage. It was just, okay, we have no live sports right now. We don't know when we're going to have live sports. So how do we approach that situation? We had to approach that with our programming team to say, okay, what are we going to air? We had this, 3 hours of Premier League coverage or 4 hours of NHL coverage. We no longer have those live hours. What are we going to put in those program windows? So there was a lot of discussion and triage with them. And then with our external partners, our advertising partners, they had dollars committed to that. And so ultimately what we came up with was, as a group, was, we can give you three options. The three options that we want to put in front of you are: one, you can put your dollars on hold, and when those live sports come back, you'll be placed back in those live sports as your original. Two, you can keep your dollars there and they can air in the replacement program. So if you specifically wanted to be on air on, March 25th, that may no longer be, a live NHL game, but instead you're going to air in this replacement programming on NBC Sports Network. Three was, we can move those dollars. We have the strategic advantage of being a part of NBC Universal, where we've got, multiple broadcast networks, we've got multiple cable networks, and we can move your dollars into other programming in that same window. So that instead of airing in NBC Sports on March 25th, you're now going to air in some entertainment programming on USA Network, or, on Sci-Fi, or one of our other networks. Those are the three sort of options that we went to our clients with. Now, some of our clients came back with a fourth option, which was, no, just give us our money back. And that was obviously one that we wanted to avoid. But in some scenarios, we agreed to that. And there was a lot that went into that sort of decision-making and negotiation back and forth. And then also there was triage with our production team as well to say, okay, once we do go back live, what are the expectations that we should be setting? Because no longer can you have, 14 people in a crowded control room. You can't have, 6 cameramen standing around, and you can't have, 3 on-air analysts standing side by side, right? So we had to figure out with production how all of that would work as well. But then as sports started to come back, that's sort of the next phase of it. And the next phase of innovation was that sports was coming back. And that was fantastic for us to get live sports programming. But as you know so well in your role, it wasn't coming back with full stadiums, with full arenas, with full racetracks, with full golf courses. It was coming back without fans. So then as we started to work with our property partners and our advertising partners, we started to discuss, okay, how does that affect your plans? You can't, as a sponsor, let's say you're an official sponsor of one of our partner properties, you can't run a hospitality program. You can't run an on-site activation program because the venues are empty. It's just the competitors and the support staff that are there. So that's where we evolved into, how can we help you? How can we take your investment with us, leverage what you're doing with the property, and tell your story in another way. And ultimately, the main area that we could really help with there was creating new and engaging branded content. And so that's where the advantage of being a media company came into play, and that's where we could innovate with our partners. And an example that I'm really proud of some of the work that we did in that space was, we had a partnership with Advanced Auto Parts, which I don't know if that's a brand that's active in Canada, but they're an auto aftercare, right? You go there, you DIY guys that want to work on their car and need parts, or you need oil or whatever, that they're auto aftercare. So they had an official partnership with IndyCar, but again, there was a lot of things that they couldn't do. And so we were in discussions with them anyway about an on-air partnership. And so given the evolution that we were going through in 2020, we work with them to create some branded content where we took archival footage from previous Indianapolis 500s over the years. We got an icon of motorsports, Roger Penske, who owns an IndyCar team, a very successful race car owner, and actually recently has bought Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And working with Roger, who wanted to help because Advanced Auto Parts was one of his clients as well, we created this branded content that told a story through archival footage leading up to the Indianapolis 500 this year, with Roger Penske doing the voiceover. And so a really unique, cool piece of branded content that we then ran coming out of commercial break. So we had a commercial break. We're coming back into the program time. Mike Tirico, our on-air talent, leads into it. It runs. You've got this cool piece of sort of historic content that's promoting their Die Hard Batteries brand, with Roger doing the voiceover, and then it bleeds back in and really sort of blurs the commercial and sort of content pieces together. And that's the kind of work in general that we were able to do this year, and quite frankly, we can do going forward and have done in the past, but really being able to help lift up those brands and those partners who were all of a sudden handcuffed in ways that they could activate their sports relationships.
I think it's safe to say through the challenging times of COVID and not having fans in the stands, one of the benefactor, or one of the benefits of this, is the fan engagement strategies, whether it's the broadcasters are trying to deploy or the properties themselves are trying to innovate, are better and more in depth or unique, and is maybe forcing us to do some things that we were a bit hesitant to do previously, whether it was grant too much access or sometimes in team sports, you don't want to ask the coach that. And you deal with this all the time, where your cameras want to be in the locker room at any moment for NHL hockey, and that's not always possible. But you push as much as you can. So how have the properties been to work with, and from that regard specifically, as you guys push the limit for fan engagement and interaction?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. I mean, I think across the board, in every aspect of not just our business, but business in general, there's been innovation forced upon us in the last 10, 11 months that will make us all better, and we should not do away with once we return to some kind of normal. Across the board, our partners have been great. They certainly understand our business and the important role that we play in the sports ecosystem. So they've been great. We've been proud of all of those relationships and appreciative of all of them. I think, NASCAR, if I had to pick one specifically, I think NASCAR, did an amazing job this year, or I should say last year, in 2020. Not only were they one of the first sports to be able to get back up and running with live content here in the States, but also in the period before that, they did a fantastic job of taking their esports platform and really making some amazing content to keep fans engaged, to keep content. In that case, it was actually for Fox Sports, not for us, because it was the way our rights with NASCAR. Fox Sports has the first half of the season. We have the second half of the season. So it happened to be in Fox's window, but it's no more, no less impressive in that, they quickly pivoted and they have this platform where they could put real drivers, so names that people know, and put them in this esports platform to race online and put that on traditional linear television. And while, is it, as a NASCAR fan myself, I don't just, I get to work in it, but I'm a fan. It gave me something live to watch, and I loved it. And the numbers were pretty impressive. And IndyCar soon after pivoted the same way, and we aired some IndyCar content from an esports platform. So, those two particular properties and the way they leveraged a different virtual platform to create some live content for people to watch at a time when there wasn't any live sports happening was impressive. I also was impressed with NASCAR's, handling of sort of the social justice and Black Lives Matter protests and engagement that happened sort of in the summer of 2020. It's a space that I think NASCAR has traditionally sort of struggled with, given the roots of their sport. But they really embraced it and sort of dived in front on, and working with, the only African-American driver in the top tier, Bubba Wallace, really stood by him. And I think with some of the steps they took, they were able to advance themselves in that space. Within 1 year, I think they were able to do what under normal circumstances might have taken them 4 or 5 years to do. And so a lot of credit to them for how they took that on.
I would agree, Russ. NASCAR in its roots is certainly challenged in that space. And what Bubba Wallace did as an athlete and how he was standing strong and forward on that was impressive and brave. And then NASCAR along the way, certainly we were watching them, and I think a lot of the sports world was watching what they were doing. I would agree with you. It was impressive there. One of the initiatives that you've seen across a number of leagues has been, this gathering of virtual communities, right? You talked about it in the esports space. For us in Major League Soccer, we had the virtual communities that were broadcast into venue as well. NBA did a tremendous job with bringing together these virtual rooms, and I think it was upwards of 20 rooms that they were opening up for fans, and then they would put certain ones on broadcast behind the players' benches and whatnot. So, sense of community that we can't have at venues, properties and leagues are trying to recreate to the best of our abilities. Not the same. It's certainly not the same as the live in-game experience, but we're certainly innovating in that space. And now we're seeing NFL and this weekend, the Super Bowl. And we will see, live fans in venue and 20,000 fans in venue at Raymond James Stadium. So, that level of hope is starting to flicker a lot brighter for us in the world. So that's certainly a positive done in the right and safe environment. So Russ, the next question that I want to shift to is about the media landscape. So you're almost 7 years at NBC, and in that relatively short time, we've seen the media landscape transform and change, and we're still seeing this up until last week. We're going to continue to see things change. So over your time, we've seen Twitter, purchase into rights for whether it's NFL. You see Amazon Prime getting into the game. Twitch is getting into the sports game and rights game as well. And then, some big announcements out of your organization as well with regards to transformation from, linear to over the top with your new service, Peacock. So I'd love to just hear open-ended question about the strategy that goes into that, how you guys compete in that space, because the world is different from when it was just NBC, Fox, ABC, and ESPN bidding for rights. Now you've got 10, 15, I didn't mention DAZN, 10, 15 players in the mix there. So from your seat, how does that look?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Chris. It's evolving, almost faster than folks can keep up. Just when you think you've got your head around where it sits today, it's already evolved to the next phase of it. And in the big picture beyond sports, right? When we talk about sort of the world that we grew up in, it was, well, if you want to watch this particular content, you need to be here at 10 p.m. on Thursday night, and that's where you need to be to watch it. And where we've evolved to over the last 10, 15, 20 years is that's no longer the proposition. The proposition is, I want to watch that content, but as the consumer, I get to decide when, where, what device I watch it on. And the one sort of partial holdout to that has been live sports, right? Because nobody wants to watch a game 3 days later on, on DVR or on, back in the day, or on, on demand. You want, you're watching it live. And so that's been a little bit of a holdout for sports, which still exists. People want to watch it live, but the device or the location of where they want to watch it has evolved in the same way that sort of entertainment programming has evolved. And so, we need to be conscious of that, and we need to evolve with that, and we need to make sure that we serve the viewer in that way. And we've done that in a variety of ways over the past few years. Ultimately, what we want to make sure that we do is provide our property partners with the biggest platforms that we can provide them, while serving the audience in the place and the location that they want to consume the live content as well. The additional players that are coming in are also, additional competitors can drive the price up. And so we have to look at new monetization models to make sure that we can afford and make sure that the property partnerships that we have make good business sense for us. It makes no sense to serve the fan and to serve the advertiser if we're losing millions of dollars a year. That's not what we're in the business to do. We're a for-profit business. We're looking to be a solid growth, profitable business. And so the old days of, our advertising dollars, how much advertising dollars can we bring in, and does that cover the cost of the rights fees plus the production? That's an outdated model, right? And so we need to look at what are other ways that we can monetize these properties. We can monetize them through subscription fees. That's not a new model either. That's sort of the phase 2 of the monetization model. It was advertising, and then when cable was born, it's advertising plus subscription fees. And now we've moved to a place where those are still revenue streams for us, but in many cases they're static revenue streams where we really don't have the opportunity to grow them in the way that we would like to. And so again, as people have been more comfortable paying directly for content, whether that's a Netflix subscription, whether that's a Disney Plus subscription, whether that's a Hulu subscription, that is, again, I think something from our generation when we were kids, we never thought about paying $5 to get content. We knew that we got to watch the content, and because we got to watch the content, we had to watch this pot of advertising. But that's no longer the case. The consumer is used to paying for it. And so we've taken a little bit of a unique approach to that over the top, if you will, direct to consumer model, is that, we're trying to blend that with, excuse me, I just getting a phone call, just cancel that. We're trying to blend that with serving our advertisers too, right? Because Netflix, as successful as they are, and it's a great business model for them, if you're an advertiser that wants to speak to that audience, you just can't. There's no advertising on Netflix. And what we want to make sure is that we continue to serve that advertising community that's been such an important part of our business since NBC was born. So with Peacock, we've created a model that blends that, where there's a subscription fee with a limited number of hours. Sorry, my phone is a limited number of hours. A limited number of advertising pods, while there's still being a subscription fee, but that subscription fee being very manageable and driving a lot of premium content there. So it's an evolving space. We obviously, recently announced that NBC Sports Network, we're going to sunset that at the end of 2021. That does not mean that we're moving away from, linear television sports programming. We believe that, in engaging or leveraging the USA Network, which actually has a distribution of about 6 million additional homes above and beyond NBC Sports Network, that we can provide a bigger both promotional and programming platform for our partners there. There's still some details being worked out about exact programming windows, but we think that's the right strategy moving forward, with Peacock, our streaming service, being a home for some of that programming as well.
Yeah, in the early stages of launch of Peacock, I saw what I think is pretty tremendous success, and I think it was over 20 million subscribers early on into the service. So obviously a good start. One thing that caught my eye last week, may have been the week before last, is WWE has for a long time been a leader in driving subscriptions for their own channel, WWE Network, and well over 1 million subscribers, and at the high point I think up to 1.6 million at $9.99 a month, having some pretty good revenue from that. Now we saw Peacock and WWE enter into a formal partnership where the WWE Network will go away, and Peacock will now stream a lot of the original content that was on WWE Network, the big events, whether it's SummerSlam or WrestleMania. That's a massive deal, and there's some really serious money involved. So curious to hear some insight around that one. And while it's not necessarily live sports, I mean, it's sports and entertainment, and WWE is an industry leader in our industry for sure.
Yeah, and the WWE relationship is actually managed out of our entertainment division, not our sports division. So wasn't directly involved there, but the strategy behind it is something, and the trends behind it is something that we're seeing across the board. As there are more subscription services, whether it's again Netflix, HBO Max, Disney Plus, right? For a consumer that wants to take in all of that content, you're starting to see an increase in what would be your monthly cost of accessing all of that. And so what that's done is it's made it a little bit more difficult for the niche programming services and streaming services. PGA Tour Live, you've seen a similar approach where they used to have their own streaming service. They now partner with ESPN Plus and Disney Plus to be a part of their service. The WWE model is the same way, is that those single sport or single sports and entertainment platforms, it's more difficult to justify the value of those when you're only receiving one sport. And so for the properties themselves, and in the specific case of the WWE, being a part of Peacock, and there's a significant guaranteed revenue that we're providing to WWE in return. But what they also get is being a part of Peacock is that there's a greater value proposition of, okay, now I can pay my, whether it's the $4.99 a month or $9.99 a month level. Those are the two premium levels. As WWE is a property, I'm going to be a part of those levels of the platform. And as if I'm a fan of WWE, then I'm paying, let's say I go for the higher level premium Peacock subscription, I'm paying the same amount and I still get my WWE content, but I now get all this other content that goes with it. And for us, it's another engaged audience that sees value in Peacock, so that we can continue to grow the value of Peacock and ultimately the number of subscribers to Peacock and the engagement of those subscribers, the amount of time that they spend on the platform. So it really is sort of a trend that we're seeing in the industry, but also one that has benefits, and not to be cliche, but is a partnership that drives value for both WWE and for us.
And the consumer, right?
And the consumer,
and
yeah, absolutely.
True value for the consumer there, and that's a great example. You might be paying the same amount as you did, but you're getting all these other things as well.
Right, and similarly, you can look at our Premier League content that airs on Peacock, and our Premier League content has been one of the largest, if not largest, drivers of new subscriptions to Peacock. It's been tremendously valuable for our Peacock business. And the way that we used to have those extra games was on a service called NBC Sports Gold Premier League Pass. And it was basically $5 a month, and you got all of this Premier League content. We've now moved that to Peacock, $4.99, $5 a month. You get all that same Premier League content, but now you get all the other, movies, The Office, series, original content, everything that goes with that. So absolutely much greater value to the consumer as well.
So Russ, as the media landscape changes, and for us in our industry, one of the biggest things right now that is the topic of discussion and is evolving extremely quickly is sports betting, single game sports betting. And what we've seen in the US specifically over the last year and a bit, specifically in New Jersey, and what they've been able to drive there by legalizing single game prop betting is tremendous. Obviously the consumer wants that service. They want to be able to bet on single games, and from a government standpoint, they're driving significant amount of taxes. New York State looks like it's getting closer and closer, and the governor is very vocal about trying to bring it aboard. It has impact into broadcast as well, potentially down the road or current times. And I know all broadcasters are thinking about how they prepare for this. On the brand side or the property side, it has impact on fan engagement as well, and it's a big deal for us as well as sponsorship. So, needless to say, it's one of the biggest topics in our industry right now. Would love to hear from your standpoint and in your seat how you guys are managing through sports betting and the changing world that we're living in there.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. It's another rapidly evolving piece of the landscape, and it won't be long before the majority of states within the U.S. have legalized sports gambling in some shape or form. And as we looked at it, we had a strategic question to answer first, which was what role do we want to play in that category, in that industry? Certainly, we knew from the start we could be a platform for all of the players in the industry, from William Hill to DraftKings to FanDuel to anybody to partner with us and use our targeted sports platforms and our scale platforms to promote their business. And that's something that we knew we had the capability to do. But there was a bigger question of, well, shouldn't we play a greater role, and can we actually take some ownership in that industry? Can we serve a greater role than just a promotional partner? And that's ultimately the avenue that we decided to go down. And it's been out there for almost a year now. So, your students can, Google NBC Sports and PointsBet and find the press release and learn more. But we ultimately formed a strategic relationship with a company called PointsBet. And PointsBet is a company out of Australia, and sports gambling has been legal in Australia since I was a kid, so 40 plus years. So there's a lot of experience, much like there's a lot of experience in the UK. And so we partnered with PointsBet, and in a way that serves what we believe to be both short-term and long-term goals around the rapid growth of sports gambling in the U.S. This relationship sees PointsBet implemented and integrated across a variety of platforms, across our national platforms, across our regional sports networks, across all of our digital and social engagement to promote PointsBet and their role in the industry. But from a longer term perspective, it'll actually see us with some equity in PointsBet as well. So we are vested in their success in a very tangible way, in that we want to see them grow because we're ultimately a part owner of the company now. And so the strategic decision that we made was that we were going to make that commitment to them, and they were going to make that commitment to us. The other side of that coin is it prevents us from doing business in a significant way from a sponsorship standpoint with others in the industry. But again, as we looked at it sort of with a clean slate, as this industry and category was really ramping up in the US, we believe that the longer term play of structuring a relationship in that way and committing to that level of exclusivity with PointsBet in return for both revenue and equity was the best long-term play for us.
It's really fascinating. I think, in our discussion earlier, before we started recording, we talked about, the amount of betting that's being done in Jersey specifically in sports relative to that of Vegas, who's had sports books for, so long. It's just crazy to see how that industry is evolving and changing. So we've all got our eyes on that. And specifically here in Canada, with our government, there's some bills that are looking at getting passed here shortly that will hopefully legalize as well. And then for us, like I said, sponsorship and specifically fan engagement, we think there's great opportunities to drive new fandom for our properties. And for me, specifically for soccer and for Canadian football, big opportunity there. So, thanks for that insight.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we've all seen what fantasy sports has done for engagement, and this is that supercharged. So, big opportunity for all of us in the industry.
So, Russ, this has been a really good discussion so far on your current role, but let's throw back in time a little bit and talk about some of the work you've done previously. So, right behind you, I'm looking at a yellow soccer scarf.
Yeah, it's my Socceroos scarf, the Australian national team.
There you go. Let's talk about a little bit of your time in Australia and some of the experiences there. You had a stint with the Hyundai A-League and worked down there after your time at Major League Soccer. So this is an international sports marketing class.
Yep.
And you took the learnings of what you had here in North America and brought it over down to Australia. Just a little bit of insight into your experience working down there in that football federation.
Yeah, it was a great experience, great personal experience. I'd grown up in Australia as a kid and then moved to the States as a teenager. And so the opportunity to go back and work in my original home market was sort of a dream come true, something that I always wanted to do. So, was very excited to get that opportunity. I'll start with sort of the similarities, if you will, of soccer in the marketplace in Australia coming from the US. And I think that was part of the reason why they saw value in having me at that time, having spent the years that I'd spent at MLS and some coming and working for them. So from a market position, soccer in Australia is a very similar position as it is in, I'll say, the US and Canada, in that, it's an up and coming sport as it relates to a professional league. It's a sport that doesn't have a lot of successful history at the professional level, up against bigger sports, where the bigger sports here are, NFL and NHL and NBA and baseball. In Australia, you've got that same with what we call AFL, which is Australian football. You've got rugby, you've got cricket. So you've got this same market position where you've got these bigger, more established professional sports, but you also have a really very strong grassroots base, which is, again, what soccer has here in the US and Canada, is all these kids that for several generations now have grown up playing the sport. But for whatever reason, it's just never been converted to, a successful professional league. And the last piece with that market position is you're also trying to grow a league at a time where you've got global competitors within your own sport. So just like here in the US or in Canada, in Australia, you have soccer fans who won't engage with the local market team because they think it's beneath them because they watch the Premier League or they watch La Liga from Spain. And so from that standpoint, so many similarities. And you would think, okay, well, everything applies from MLS to there. Well, there's a lot of differences as well, which I was aware of as I was going into it, but really my eyes were fully open to the implication of those differences once I dove into the job. And those differences, are across some really key structural planks of any professional league. First was ownership. Ownership in the A-League, and not to disparage it, they are doing their best, but there wasn't the strength of ownership that we had and you still have in MLS. And that ownership strength comes first from, financial strength, in that you can think long-term, not overly concerned. I'm sure your bosses tell you otherwise, but not overly concerned about, the yearly P&L. I mean, it matters, but it's about long-term asset growth and being able to look forward. The ownership strength in Australia was a little bit too short-term focus about, okay, what's our annual P&L and how is this affecting my cash flow? And disparage, it was their money. They have the right to look at that. But when I think about the model and how MLS had grown, it had gone through a lot of those short-term losses, but you had seen the asset value grow from, what was, 5 million for the first teams to get in through the, what was the expansion fee at Toronto, like 20 million?
We were 10 million, and I think Charlotte was close to 300 million.
So yeah, exactly, to my point about long-term asset growth. So that was one piece. The thing that then sort of amplified that challenge was the governance structure, right? The governance structure of MLS, all credit to Mark Abbott. No one could have really developed a better structure, in my eyes, in my opinion, for that long-term growth than the single entity structure that MLS created, where as an owner of a club, you're really a part owner of the league with operating rights in your marketplace, but those are in perpetuity. You own those as long as you operate within the guidelines of MLS, and then you get to sell that asset to someone else at some point when you want to sell it. The governance structure in Australia was very different. It was a license, basically a league license. And so those owners were buying a license to operate within the A-League that had a specific term on it. And it was only a 5-year term. So feasibly, as an owner of a club in the A-League, I could operate my club to an A+ level. I could do everything right. And if the governing body, which was in this case was FFA, Football Federation Australia, the national governing body of the sport, decided at the end of those 5 years they don't like me, they could just choose not to renew the license. And so as an owner, I could then understand, well, what motivation do I have to invest in this long term? Because I might have this pulled out from underneath me. I might invest all of these dollars. I could create an incredible academy. I could sell out my stadium. I could do all the right things and not be rewarded with it. So that was one of the things that I really stressed with the senior management team, all the way up to the chairman of Football Federation Australia, was you may not be able to convert this to a single entity, but you've got to create a longer term vision and a longer term incentive for these owners to invest in their club long term. I said, in my eyes, it should be you own that license in perpetuity until you want to sell it. You can put some protections against that, like if they don't do X, Y, and Z, there could be a board review of their license. But essentially, if they're investing in the club, investing in the brand, investing in the market, they should be able to benefit from that over the long term. Otherwise, again, what's the incentive to that long-term investment? So that was that ownership and the governance structure combined is by far the biggest difference. I would say a third difference that was also critical is just the infrastructure of stadiums and stadium ownership in Australia is very much government-led and government-operated. And so unlike in MLS where, and Toronto FC was, at the forefront of this, building this incredible venue where you can merchandise the sport and present the sport in the environment that it should be. The clubs in Australia really don't have that opportunity. First of all, again, most of the owners probably didn't have the financial strength to do so. But even if they wanted to, I mean, even the AFL, which is the Australian Football League, which is what I would say is the equivalent of the NFL in Australia. It's the biggest, strongest league in Australia, from size of crowd to size of TV audience to financial strength. Even the AFL, they have multiple clubs who share venues. So they don't have one club, one venue. You've got a lot of clubs in Melbourne and a lot of clubs in Sydney, again, with the concentration of the populace in those two markets. and you have big clubs in the AFL that share venues. And so that was another difference that really impacted the ability of the clubs. Some of them were forced, again, much like the early days of MLS, forced to play in 40,000 seat stadiums where a 15,000 person crowd feels empty, doesn't feel good, doesn't feel like, hey, this is the place to be. Whereas if you put 15,000 people in a 20,000 seat venue, all of a sudden it does feel pretty cool, right? So those were some of the differences that I just had to try and get my head around and try and work to see where we could make changes to make the league more successful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of the ownership structure within that league. But if I put my fan hat on, and understanding the inside of fan development, it's expensive to develop long-term fans and grow them into avid fans. And from an ownership standpoint, if you don't have certainty on ownership of that franchise, how much are you going to invest into new innovation, facilities, fan programs beyond your short term? So it's a tough model to react in. And really, you're spending your money on, we just need to put bums in seats and have this short term success versus the long term. The structure of MLS, you hit the nail on the head, has done it right. And over the years, since we've been in the league, the franchise value continues to grow. So yeah, the clubs on an annual basis, still are struggling to drive revenue and make money, but that long-term franchise value is certainly there. So that single entity model has worked. Transitioning to your time, Russ, at Major League Soccer and Soccer United Marketing, the business arm of Major League Soccer is called SUM, Soccer United Marketing. And not only does SUM control the rights and the commercial rights for Major League Soccer, they also control the commercial rights for U.S. Soccer Federation and the Mexican Soccer Federation as well, the national team programs, if you will. So at your time there, you're leading sponsorships across partnership marketing, you're doing sales on all of these different properties, all unique selling features. Much like us at MLSE, we've got all these different properties that you're selling. I'm just curious to know how you're transitioning between your different brands, your partners, your sales strategies when you're trying to sell a Mexican Federation here, which is an established organization. And then you've got Major League Soccer. When you were there, we were still growing. We're not an established organization at that point. Would love to hear how you managed through that all at the same time.
Yeah, sure. And as a little bit of background for the students, again, some gets a little bit of bad press, if you will, from some hardcore soccer fans who think it's this, soulless entity that doesn't understand the sport. But ultimately, along with the ownership structure we talked about earlier, I mean, SUM's one of the, major founding principles that made Major League Soccer what it is today. Before SUM existed, soccer was essentially selling against itself in the US on a constant basis, where if I was a brand interested in soccer and I thought, soccer might make sense for us, I might have, someone from Major League Soccer knocking on my door on Monday, and then someone from IMG, who actually had the US soccer rights, knocking on my door on Tuesday, and then some local promoter for a Mexican national team game knocking on my door on Wednesday. And I would just throw up my hands and say, I like soccer. I think it makes sense, but I can't figure this stuff out. And these guys are all telling me different things. And so, you know what, it's too complicated. I'm going to stay away from it. And SUM brought that under one roof. And so all of a sudden, we had the ability to talk about soccer holistically from a commercial aspect, from a commercial standpoint. And we could create soccer marketing solutions depending upon what your company was and what your objectives were and who you were trying to reach. And so we understood that we had, at the top level, we had a whole of soccer opportunity that we could sell, right? So if you were a particular brand and you wanted all in on the sport of soccer, then by working with us, you could be activating across every Mexican national team game in the US, all the US men's and women's national team games, across MLS from a national perspective, and you could own the sport. But there were very few companies that were ready to do that back at that point. There's many more now. And there were very few that were willing to make that level of investment to do so. But again, having those three different major properties enabled us to target the solutions depending on what the companies were doing and what their objectives were. And so if we had a company that was really targeted on the Hispanic community and more specifically the Mexican American community, we knew that we had the number one property that you could work with. So you had the opportunity to leverage the IP across retail, the IP across in-store, in communications. You could activate across 5 games in the US on an annual basis, engage with that audience. And that was, I mean, that's a home run if you wanted to reach that community. If you were an Olympic or a World Cup rights holder, then maybe the U.S. men's and women's national teams were the properties that would make most sense. And so as we looked at our sales strategy and our targeting, we'd look, okay, who are the Olympic sponsors? Who are the USOC sponsors? Who are the World Cup sponsors who want to activate those properties locally here in the U.S.? And those were our number one targets for reaching out on the U.S. soccer property. And then MLS, again, depending on if you wanted local market activation, if you wanted to be a part of the backbone of the sport for a longer period of time, MLS made a lot of sense for those kind of companies. But the real value was that it enabled us to get a lot more companies and a lot more brands to participate in the sport, and also gave us a chance to prove our value and prove the value of the sport. And there are a number of examples where we would have a particular brand, a particular sponsor come in and just sponsor one of those properties. And by the time, let's say 3 years later or 4 years later, we're going into a renewal conversation, they would say, hey, we love what we've done with the Mexican national team. We now actually think that we can apply what we've learned in the sport and grow that to, hey, we also want to sponsor the league because we want to be able to engage with this audience on a more frequent basis other than just the 5 matches a year. Or we want to grow into the U.S. men's and women's national teams because we want to, own that national team space. And we believe that we can activate rights across, the Mexican national team and the U.S. national team with different audiences in different markets where one might have been stronger than the other. But it gave us that chance to grow those relationships from one property to 2 properties to multiple properties, which also, not coincidentally, grew our revenue with those companies as well.
We can't underestimate the value of, when you bring these rights together and you start to talk to bigger brands, let's say for Mexican soccer, what it can do for these, emerging brands or emerging leagues like Major League Soccer. At the end of the day, our partnership marketing and the right partners can help grow the sport, and done the right way, there's a tremendous value in what it's going to bring to the fan and the overall experience as well. So vitally important. I've always been a huge believer in, sponsors they're not putting up signs. That's not the goal of a sponsor. It's to engage and to bring value to. And that's, in your career, in my career, that's what we've always focused on. And the right partners who do the right thing always focus on this as a key priority.
No, you're spot on there, Chris, and thank you for bringing that up. It's an important point that I didn't raise, and in those days we were focused on the bare minimum as partnership marketers was we need to drive value for the partner, right? They have to see value in their business through this partnership. But where we really strive to be and where we really should be is how are we driving value for their business, but also driving value for our business beyond just the revenue, but true growth value, as you just pointed out. So again, thanks for making the point. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. So we're going to wrap with a couple questions here, and we've got mostly 4th year students in this class across various different marketing disciplines. And the sports executive in my career has certainly changed, and what that sports executive might look like, and some of the qualities that they might bring to the table. So from your seat, what do you see as trends in the future sports executive? What do you look for when you are hiring somebody in this industry?
Yeah, Chris, I think, first and foremost, I think number one is being a good listener, and listening to understand the person that you're working with. not to give them an answer, but just to listen and to understand. Because in my world and in your world as well, we can't offer solutions. We can't offer effective solutions if we haven't really understood what it is that a brand or potential partner is facing, right? We need to try and understand their business as best we can. We can never understand it to the level that they understand it because they're living it every day. But we need to understand it as best we possibly can. What are their challenges? What are their opportunities? What are the key inflection points in their business chain, right? Where can you make a difference? And that all starts with being a good listener. And not only with external partners, but that's critical of if you want to be a leader, if you want to manage people, no matter what, if you can't listen to people and really understand and actively listen to what people are trying to share with you, you're putting yourself at a almost impossible disadvantage to be able to really move forward. So for me, it always starts with being a good listener. The next stage for me is, okay, then can you be a good problem solver? Because the logical next step is, okay, I've heard what you've told me. I understand what you're facing. How can I apply what I have, right? We all have a kit bag, right? We all have a kit bag of assets. I had a certain kit bag when I was at MLS. I have a different kit bag now. You've got a kit bag there with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. We all have assets at our beck and call that we can use to solve problems. And solve problems, is maybe not the right exact wording, because sometimes it's not solving a problem, it's taking advantage of an opportunity, but it's the same process of how can I now apply what we have, the assets that I have available from my organization, and how can I apply them to your objectives to deliver value. And so start with being a good listener, evolve to being a good problem solver. And then ultimately for me, the other piece is, be empathetic to people, really try and understand what life is like in someone else's shoes. I think if you can put yourself in someone else's position, understand the pressures and the challenges that they're under, and ultimately take those into consideration, I think that leads to long-term success. Because for me, winning a one-sided negotiation, it might feel good for about 5 minutes, but it's not going to help you in the long term, right? You're not going to have long-term success and long-term partnerships if the other guy walks away feeling like, man, I just got screwed. I mean, I really lost, because it doesn't leave a good taste. We want people to walk away from negotiations and ultimately and partnerships feeling like those are good people. They did their best to help us out, and we got value out of it. So those are kinds of three, I think, and I understand that those are fairly high level general applications. But again, as you're thinking about, and I'm sure your students are thinking of a variety of different careers in their future, I think those kind of skills and attributes can be applicable and can be valuable to anybody's career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Your last point there of empathy and understanding people, no more important during the last 11 months, right?
Absolutely.
And dealing with either internal staff, people, employees, or external clients, because we're all going through this together.
Yeah.
Okay, to close it out, Russ, some quick hitters. We'll just have some fun with. We'll have some fun with this.
Yeah.
Favorite career moment?
There's probably there's a bucket of a few of them, but it's all the same theme, and it probably is, being at my first home TFC game, being at my first home Portland Timbers game, being at the first home Seattle Sounders game. At every one of those moments, I just looked around and I saw what was happening, and honestly, I would tear up because you're like, this is happening. Like the little contribution that I'm making, and I would never overvalue the contribution that I made to it, but there's a tiny little piece that I added to that. This is working, and we're doing something here in this sport that I love, and I set out at the start of my career to be a part of, and just being in those stadiums and enjoying those moments. And I know Kathy Carter, and Kathy and I, we worked together at MLS some, we used to, we would joke, we would be at a lot of those moments together, and we'd look at each other. We're like, man, it's dusty in here. There's some stadium, there's dust still around because, we're tearing up. We're so, overwhelmed in our emotion of seeing what was happening in these marketplaces. These sort of what we used to call MLS 2.0 marketplaces that was evolving. Every one of those was special for me.
Thank you for that answer. That was great. The last person I asked this of, Andrew from Labatt and Budweiser, he was at MLS Cup when we won, and I wanted him to say that, and he didn't give me that answer. So I appreciate that, Russ. That was good. Do you have a best athlete moment or a best artist moment that the students might like to hear about?
Yeah, probably my best, and I've been lucky to meet a lot of athletes over the years, especially in soccer, but now at NBC, broader than that. But I'm a massive Liverpool fan. Liverpool is the only team that can make or break my day. And ironically, and I had two athletes that I adored when I was growing up, sort of that kid level of passion. One was a guy named Dennis Lilly, who was a cricket bowler, and wouldn't make sense to anybody who's going to see this. But the other was Kenny Dalglish, who's a Liverpool legend. And actually at MLS Cup 2008, which was at FC Dallas' stadium, Toyota Park, I think it is now, was Pizza Hut Park back in the day. They were hosting Houston versus New England in Dallas. And Kenny's son, Paul Dalglish, was playing for the Houston Dynamo at the time. I'm walking around the stadium maybe an hour, 45 minutes before kickoff, just doing what we always do in this business, which is kind of taking in how fans are interacting and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, boom, Kenny Dalglish is right in front of me. And I was kind of dumbstruck because I couldn't put two and two together. This Liverpool legend that I'd grown up with, and I'm seeing him in Dallas, Frisco, Texas. And I stopped him and I just said, Mr. Dalglish, I'm a huge fan. And I was really kind of starstruck for the first time. So just getting to see him and meet him all as briefly as it was. We had a quick conversation about Paul playing in the game. Liverpool had played earlier that day, and we talked about that game. And I walked away, my feet not touching the ground for the rest of the day.
Love it. Okay, and the last question. After your career is all said and done, what are some things that you want to be remembered by, or that people would say about Russell Sargeant?
I hope, and this is related to some of the stuff we talked about, I hope people just refer to me and think that I was a good teammate, whether that was, as part of an internal team and the internal teams that I've been part of, whether it's external partners that I've worked with. I just hope people say, hey, that was a guy that, tried to do right by people, tried to do right by his business partners, and helped us be successful. If nothing else, and people say that, then I'll walk away into retirement very happy.
I love it. And listen, Russ, we haven't seen each other in a while. We see each other at conferences now, but we haven't worked together in a while. But you were right at the top of my mind as somebody I wanted to have as part of this. So, I'll say that, there's the impression that you've left is always a great person to deal with along the way. And, we last worked together a while ago. So there you go. I think it's working.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. And the feeling there is very mutual. I have nothing but fond memories of our time together when I was at MLS and you were getting TFC up and running, and you guys have done an amazing job, not just with Toronto SC, but with all the properties that you have there at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And hopefully one day we'll get to work a little bit more closely once again.
There you go. So listen, Russ, thank you very much. This was great. I think the students are going to love hearing all this insight. You are definitely, you've attended the best last sporting event of anybody I've talked to so far since COVID started. So you were at Anfield when all this mess hit us. You brought us through a journey of your career, the media and ever-changing media landscape right now, and then reflected on some special moments. So thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate it, Russ.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much.